Everyone, welcome to the public open source demo, session 8. First, we're gonna present the event rules, then some announcement about PrestaShop version 1776 and 1777. And then we're gonna present some demos, one about PHP 8 compatibility with Matthew and Thomas, improving PrestaShop templating by Daniel Ashlaf talks, improve our JS code base using static types with TypeScript by me, another demos about documentation for the 8.0 version, and one last demos about Symfony form demo module. And then we are gonna have a small question and asking session. So first, event rules, don't hesitate to use the chat if you have some question, and you have like 1 minute delay on the stream, so don't hesitate to ask question on the chat. The second word is about this event is about the open source project, so it's not about the company. So we won't speak about the company there. And the third rule is that this event is public and recorded, so everything will be shared publicly later. And don't forget about the code of conduct. That's it. So first, two announcements. One is that the 1776 version has been delivered on 9th of August, and dispatch still fix 31 regressions reported on 177 versions. The second announcement is that patch 1777 has been delivered on 19th of August, and it fixes one critical regression introduced on 1776 and one minor regression. And let's go about the demo. The first demo is about PHP 8 compatibility from Matthew and Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Valentin. So yes, indeed, I will be sharing my screen right now, and we're going to talk today about the amazing work of Thomas for PHP 8 compatibility. So let me check first. Yeah, okay, we can see the screen just good. So as you know, the current version we are working on, 178, it's aiming for PHP 7.4 compatibility. At each new minor version, we're trying to follow PHP new versions. It's very important. So obviously, PHP 8 is the next in line. So we started working on it for the next version after 178. The very first step to achieve PHP 8 compatibility was to upgrade Symfony. So this was already presented 2 demos before by Thomas. The main, so we jumped from version 3 to version 4. There are some important changes that have already been presented in the demos 2 months before, and they can be found, well, every demo is recorded, so it's something you can find out. And then there are some other dependencies because when we wanted PHP 8 compatibility, we needed to upgrade these dependencies to a new version because only the new versions were compatible with PHP 8. So among the most important ones, there is Guzzle, version 5 to version 7. PHP unit switched from version 7 to version 8. Then there's curl, minify, and so on. So this could impact the code that you are using on your shop, on your module, on your theme, but there was no way to do it without this. This was absolutely needed if we wanted to achieve this compatibility. So about these changes, the most important one is that the class attribute was renamed to product attributes. This again was presented 2 months ago. This is, I believe, Thomas, you can confirm if you want that it was because of PHP 8 polyfill.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then also the switch from PHP units 7 to 8 required type hinting every return type. So if you had some PHP unit test cases for your code using setup for example, you will have to put every return type all over. And Thomas, actually, this was quite most of the changes. There was obviously some little changes from PHP 7 to PHP 8, but overall, I feel like it was a little bit easier to do than, let's say, PHP 7.2 to 7.3 or 7.3 to 7.4.
Yeah, maybe it's because of the work that have been done before with PHP 7.4, and then the most important change was brought by Symfony 4.4. So overall, yeah, it was pretty much it. PHP 8 was the biggest change to do.
So that's really cool. That's good news.
Yeah.
So what comes next, actually? So when we started working on PHP 8 compatibility, we did this little list. The first item was upgrade all packages to the versions allowing us to have PHP 8 compatibility. It's done. Upgrade Symfony, it's done. Upgrade Guzzle, it's done. Now, what we have to do, well, the work that Thomas did for the core, we have to do it for every modules because every modules need to be checked to make sure it's compatible with PHP 8. I believe, Thomas, you said there's only 2 that we are not sure yet for the compatibility, so it's almost done.
Yep. And they are probably already compatible. It's just because the new version of those modules haven't been released yet and was using a dependency that we don't use anymore, that we upgraded in the last version of PrestaShop. But this dependency has been removed, but those modules haven't been released. So once the module is released, I'm pretty sure they will be compatible. So that's good news too.
Yep, great work. So, and also now our CI runs with PHP 8. So this is the first level of validation. I believe, obviously, we will need some QA exploration campaign to make sure, and community testing too, because we can't think about every possible use cases. But there's already a big part of work that's done, and we were a little bit worried about it. And in the end, it was not so big. And also, obviously, we will release some Docker images shipping with PHP 8 so that you can have a shop running in PHP 8 with a command line. That's all for PHP 8. And the cool thing about it is that, Thomas, when you were working with on this topic, you actually found out that we are not so far away from PHP 8.1 compatibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. I tried to use the early release of PHP 8.1, the alphas, and then the betas. And yesterday I installed the first RC, and it seems that we're very close to have the PrestaShop compatibility with 8.1. It's just a matter of upgrading to the very latest Symfony version, and just one dependency that we used and that we don't really need anymore. And once those 2 things are updated, we should be compatible with PHP 8.1.
Okay, that's really cool. I don't know if we will do the extra work of checking thoroughly every single module for PHP 8.1, at least for this major milestone. But yeah, so at least if you want to play with PHP 8.1, well, it's something you can try. It should work in most cases. And that's all for our demo. It was simple and just presenting the work that's being done. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the demo, guys. Let's continue with the demo of Daniel about improving PrestaShop templating. Daniel, okay. You can start sharing your screen if you want. Okay, let's go.
Daniel, I think you you should unmute yourself. You tried to mute yourself before and we can't unmute you. Yeah, perfect.
Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Yeah.
So hi guys. Recently, when I was bored at work, I started working on improving the responsiveness of the back office front end, cleaning some templates and fixing some small issues. So I will guide you through it. I divided the presentation to 4 points. I fixed the new order page, which is a responsibility was not great. The module positions page, and then the main point I will talk about. I completely cleaned up all templates in PrestaShop, and then some minor tweaks, and I will show you. So the create order page. I completely went through the page and fixed all the issues with responsibility. It should work fine on all screen sizes, all resolutions, all devices. So I prepared some screenshots for you. You can see how, for example, the customer search block looked before, how it looks now. There was a lot of wasted space on the left. We fixed the tables by using the Bootstrap class, the table responsive that will switch it and allow it to overflow, but not out of the screen, but it will show us a scroll bar. The same for the card step. We fixed the product search. We fixed product quantity and price editing. We fixed the currency block, which you can see was not exactly usable before. We fixed the addresses block that now nicely wrap, so you can see the full address and the data is not squished on the left. And it's all for the order create page. You can see you can find the PR. It was already merged and it will be available in PrestaShop 8.0. Next up is the module positions page. It's if you remember, there's a small box on the left that shows up only if you check some modules positions on the left for bulk actions and stuff like that. So what I did is to make it full width, and I show the box only. Sorry, I reversed the positions on the phone, so it shows up here before the main content. Also, I fixed all the inputs. I added a gray background and fixed all the switches overflowings and stuff like that. There's a small issue with the module description that's overflowing because of fixed height, but I will fix it also in some of my next PRs. This is part of the global PR I will talk about. So the main thing, I completely searched all the twig templates in PrestaShop, and I fixed all the issues with Bootstrap classes. I removed all the unneeded classes. There was a lot of code that was just not needed at all, and it just made it more complex, like harder to render and stuff like that. So with this change, you shouldn't be able to see any difference, but it will be much easier to debug, because at some points I removed maybe like 10 levels of diffs. So when you were, for example, searching for a margin or padding that was somewhere, you didn't have to click up through millions of elements to find it. Yeah, it will be easier to render maybe on slow computers. Like it's much easier to render if there are less levels of the elements, and it should be more stable, because we also, during this cleaning, I found many JavaScript selectors that was not exactly stable. It was like selecting div and then a child div and a child div, and I don't think you should be scared of changing the markup when doing some work with templates, and be scared of breaking stuff up. So what I did, this is a perfect example what was in the PrestaShop code base right now. All of these elements that I show here are completely unnecessary, and it only adds additional CPU time, and it's complex to just room for errors. If you have a bootstrap row with a single column, it has no effect. It only adds a negative margin, and then it goes back with padding. It has zero effect, and it's only additional code. The same if you have bootstrap columns. At least if you have at least one column set, you don't need to specify that the smallest one is of width 12. It's perfectly fine if you just have col md6 and everything that will be smaller will be automatically full width, and you don't have to specify it. I think I will show you some examples of that. So I went through the old templates. It was like 200 files, and I completely changed it. I was searching globally in my editor and for like snippets of code, and then just the manual changes, and then I re-indented all the files. So quite a lot of work. Then I found there were some elements without quotations. Although I don't know if in HTML5, but maybe before this was valid, but it's very dangerous behavior because, for example, if you have this code, you would think that it would be rendered as two classes and one ID, but depending on the browser, you could either end up with three classes, with one class, second class, and the third class called ID. This could be a class. Or the browser can decide it will render as three attributes. Attribute 1 would be class, attribute 2 would be class B, and the third one would be ID. Yeah. Always use the double quotations everywhere. I fix it everywhere, I think, in PrestaShop. What I found also was that somebody combined a row with a column in one element. This is not allowed in Bootstrap documentation, and it produces some weird behavior and weird margins. So you always need to put it to the chart element. Also removed all the container classes. These classes, the container, what it does, it limits the screen width to 1200 pixels, I think, and the fluid one is a full width container. It should be only used for limiting the screen width. I saw it used, for example, on the modules page to make a padding on an element. It shouldn't be used for that, okay? Somebody will then, for example, change. You decided that you don't want to have 15 pixels on the sides of the screen, and you want to have 5, and you think it would only change that, but then you see because somebody used the wrong class, it would change things on the places that you wouldn't expect. So don't use it. Use it only for limiting the screen width. I think it should be only like the parent element on the HTML, maybe combined with some section or something. And because I broke some stuff on one place, I decided maybe it's a good time to search all the JavaScript selectors for potentially dangerous stuff. For example, this thing here, you change one, or you remove one div that's not needed, and it will broke your JavaScript. Okay, so I search for every selector that's using the Bootstrap row, that's using some kind of basic div without a class or ID. This should be changed. So when we are doing this kind of work with templates, we are not afraid of breaking stuff. So that's all, I think. I can then show you the PR. It's quite a lot of changes with a lot of, I think I removed like 1,000 lines. It seems bigger than it is because mainly of the formatting and GitHub thinks it's a new line, but you can see 4 or like 2 layers of codes completely not needed. Also here, in like every second file was full of stuff that's completely not needed. It will be much cleaner, much easier to debug, much easier to read. For example, here you can see that just the columns was just everywhere, just completely not needed. Yeah, you can browse through the PR. I put a link to the presentation. So run it again. I hope it will launch on the same slide. Yeah, and then I did some minor tweaks. For example, the new PrestaShop switches. They were using some kind of calculation to position the white dot, but I found that on some, even I'm using monitors with resolution with no scaling, just 100% as the physical resolution, and still the switches were not perfectly aligned. So I think there are some rounding errors or something. So what I did, I changed it to, I hard coded pixels, like exact pixels to the different sizes of the switches. So now, no matter how you zoom the page, it will still be perfectly aligned. It will be pixel perfect. Then there were some form labels that were overflowing. You can see that it's not overflowing from the container here, but the line that marks the content of the box is right here. So the labels were overflowing the containers, and for example, if somebody removed the padding, it would go out of the container. So now it's perfectly aligned with the switches and the inputs that are joined to it. I also I found that if in some languages you had longer buttons, it would overflow of the containers on small screens. For example, on phones like iPhone SE or 12 mini with a 320 pixels display, it would overflow out of the containers. So we enabled table wrapping, so it will fix this issue. For example, this behavior is also standard in Bootstrap 5, so I think it was a good move. I broke some stuff during the fixing of this because I didn't realize that it will wrap also, for example, the audio status change button and file inputs, but that's some easy fix, and we will just forbid wrapping on these buttons. What's next? I have some small to do. I think we should have a look at improving responsibility of the tables. So it's better usable on the phone. I already made an issue for that when we are discussing it. And I think we could, because the back office header is using JavaScript to calculate the width, because it's floating above the content. There was no other way to do it before, but now we can use something like position sticky, and it will make the same behavior without any JavaScript and without any calculations, and it will be maybe faster. So I think that's all. Do you have some questions? I will just open the YouTube here. Matthew, do you want
Daniel.
me?
Thanks
Do
for
we
the
wait for
demo.
questions? Okay.
I didn't see any question for the moment, I think.
So I think I was clear.
No questions
so thank
so
you
far.
for listening.
Thank you for the great demo, and thank you for the great work, Daniel. This
Thank
is
you.
impressive.
I will just stop sharing my screen somewhere.
Okay, the next demo is mine. I'm gonna share the screen. And okay, let's go. So my demo is about the use of TypeScript on PrestaShop and how we improve the JS code base of the project. First, we're gonna see what is TypeScript, then how does it works. Then we're gonna see how we implemented TypeScript in the project. And then we're gonna see what we found while we were implementing TypeScript and what we need to do next about this subject, and a small bonus thing about the use of TypeScript inside the module, which is block wishlist. So first, what is TypeScript? TypeScript is a superset of the JavaScript language. This means that it adds some features, some types, some syntax, and features related to TC39. It's mainly developed by Microsoft and maintained by Microsoft, and it's an open source project. So it's also maintained by an open source community like us. It's designed to be well integrated with many editors. This means that the auto-completion and whatever will works perfectly on almost every editors, and it's compiled into vanilla JavaScript. How does it work? First, you need to install every dependencies needed. In our case, we need the dependency TypeScript, of course, and we need the dependencies TS loader because we are using a bundler called Webpack. We need another dependency called TSNode because we need to execute some TypeScript on Node.js environments because we have some tests, for example. And then we need to install some ESLint plugins in order to make ESLint understand that we are working on TypeScript and create custom rules on ESLint. After it, you need to create a simple file called tsconfig.json. Sorry. The first thing we had to do is to add some custom paths because we had like 7 or 8 custom paths on our Webpack configuration, and we need to use the exact same paths. Also, we need to add a new default type root folder called types at the root of the GS folder of our project. And we need to specify the add type default folder inside the node module folder because we override the configuration, so we need to specify it. And if you need to execute some TS on Node.js environments, such as test or whatever, using Mocha or whatever, you may need to configure the TS node package too. How we implemented TypeScript on the PrestaShop project. So first, we have a lot of attributes inside the window object and global objects related to external libraries or even internal libraries. So we needed a global window interface in order to type every attributes of the window object we added, such as jQuery, for example, toast message with show success message or whatever. The PrestaShop object is a good example too, because we have a lot of things inside this object and we needed to type it. And all this type inside this global.d.ts file are available globally on the project. We decided to, because we have a lot of external libraries, not every libraries are typed for the moment because maybe they are old, they are slowly maintained or whatever. So every libraries doesn't have a type files or a type definitions inside npm. So we decided to type them as any, as we have not the time to type external libraries. That's not our scope. But a lot of libraries already had definition files. So we added it, such as Lodash, for example, jQuery, and more and more. What we found while we implemented TypeScript. So the first, TypeScript is really more easier to implement on modern or new project. As you know, PrestaShop is an old project, and the code base is pretty big, so it was pretty hard to migrate to TypeScript, and it takes many weeks. So we were forced to use any on some external libraries, which isn't a good practice, and more and more. And when we use any type, it doesn't benefit about TypeScript, and it's pretty harder to maintain. The second part is that it doesn't generate too much bugs. I think Prodigy won't be in accord with this slide, probably, because we add some peer in order to fix some bug after the implementation of TypeScript on our code base, but it could be way worse. So how we managed to avoid the maximum of bugs when we implemented TypeScript is that we splitted the implementation into multi-pairs. The first pair was an implementation pair. The second was about reusable components, and some were about pages inside new temp folder. Others were regarding forms, grids, and whatever. So as we split as much as we can this work, the QA was way easier because they were testing small parts of the software, and the pairs were easier to review because they were really smaller. The third part is that when we implemented TypeScript, it fixed some bug that we didn't know about. I couldn't find the PR, but we found something. A contributor fixed a bug on 177, and we found that when we implemented TypeScript, the bug was not here anymore because we naturally fixed the bug without even thinking about it. So this is exactly what we want when we want to work with TypeScript. His role is to fix some bugs on the development phase before it's getting delivered on the develop branch or whatever. And as I implemented TypeScript on the project, I seen that it was really well integrated into many editors, because autocomplete was really a pleasure, and whatever typing, you can see every type when you type a component or whatever. It's really cool to work with. So now that we have TypeScript in the project, what's next? The first work we have to do is to integrate the new product page into TypeScript. Why did I skip this page? Is that this page is currently in development. It's a pretty big page, so it was the last thing I wanted to do in order to make to let the page being developed without any problems. So now it's a work in progress. I'm still working on it right now. The second thing is that a lot of view files were not migrated to TypeScript, and now it's true only on the new product page, because I migrated every view page in past few days. So it's a work in progress too. And Vue is pretty hard to use with TypeScript, because we were using Vue 2 without the composition API, so it required a lot of configuration inside our Webpack files and tsconfig files. But it's fine now. And another big work is that a lot of returns of methods, of a lot of API are not strictly typed now. Sometimes we use the record type, which means that it's not deeply typed. It will be a good thing to type all of those returns, such as product returns, for example, categories return, in order to make it way more strict and way more easy to track. Almost like a GraphQL client for people who use such a thing. And another important thing that we need to do is to provide definitions file of our whole code base, because if you want to develop a module, for example, and if you want to use TypeScript on your module, but you need to use some core files such as translatable input, for example, you may want to use the definitions file of the component you're using. And for the moment, the only way to have the definitions of the component you're using from the core is that you will need to import the component from the core directly. Something you may not want to do because every components or a lot of components are exposed inside an attribute of the window object. If you want to type it, you can't for the moment, because we don't expose our definitions inside a module, an external module. So this is a big thing to do. And I think it won't be really difficult, because you can generate every definitions file from the code base directly using TypeScript. So this is something we can do pretty fast. A little bonus, because I implemented TypeScript on block wishlist, because block wishlist used translatable inputs. So we needed to import the core file, which now is using TypeScript, but we needed to keep it retro-compatible. So I needed to configure the module in order to use the file, both GS file from past version and the TS file from the current version. So my module is recompatible, block wishlist. So I needed to add some configurations, the same that the TypeScript project on the module. So I needed to configure Webpack in order to accept TS file. I needed to add TypeScript to the node module folder, and now the module can still read the TS file or the GS file, because when we import the file, we don't use the extension of the file, so it works perfectly. If the module is not retro-compatible, it means that you're using PrestaShop components inside the window object. And for this, for the moment, you need the definition file if you want to use TypeScript. If you don't want to use TypeScript, it would work like it was working on 1.7.8. But if you want to use TypeScript, you can't type these components, because we don't provide the definitions file for the moment. But it's a work in progress. And if you want to get an example about a module working with TypeScript, don't hesitate to go to the link of the block wishlist module. It's working perfectly. And that's it for me. For the question, I think we'll see at the end, or I don't see any question for the moment. In the recent peer for project page, we try to test whether doing the work twice. Okay, it was from Jonathan. If you have any question, don't hesitate for the end of the demo. I think we'll have some time to respond to any questions. And Mathieu, let's go for your demo about documentation.
Right, yeah, thank you, Valentin, and thank you so much for the demo you did. I'm going to remove your screen and share mine. So it's in progress. And present. Here we go. Yeah. So as we mentioned before, so we're working on the next version after 1.7.8. It's going to be PrestaShop 8.0, a new major, which means that we needed to bring some changes for devdocs.prestashop.com. Because, well, for PrestaShop 1.6, there was another website. This website got used to, people now know that this is documentation for PrestaShop 1.7. And what happens when we release a new major versions? So we didn't want to create yet another website. And we also wanted to make sure that people were able to browse either the documentation for 1.7 or the documentation for 8, but it should be really easy, because if you work on one of these versions, you want documentation to tell you about what you can use, not what happens in another version. We wanted to stop merging more and more content about the current one and say, okay, there's a part for 1.7 and there's something else for 8, so that when you work either on these versions, you know where to go. So we had to change the documentation. And what we wanted that also, not only we wanted 2 sections in the documentation, one for 1.7, one for 8, we also wanted that people could easily switch between version 8 and version 1.7 for a specific topic. Because, for example, if you say tomorrow you want to upgrade your shop from 1.7 to 8, maybe you want to be able to compare the behavior of the code before and after, so you can find out what are the changes and what you need to change. So we really wanted to be able to switch from these 2 versions. So the current structure of the documentation was not enough. So before, we had a single GitHub repository. It was called PrestaShop/docs, and everything was in this repository. There was the sources, which is mainly the content, the documentation text, the layout, the theme. Everything was in a single place, and it was really easy to contribute. You could just submit a pull request against it. It gets reviewed, then merged, and we would just deploy the new website. Really easy to contribute. However, we changed the structure. We have split the sources, the layout, and the theme into 3 GitHub repositories. And contribution will continue to go in PrestaShop docs. That's a given. So why did we do the split? It's because we wanted to make sure that when people want to contribute to the new documentation, it's very easy for them to contribute either to version 8 or to version 1.7. And we decided to follow the example given by Symfony, which is basically using branches. So now we have 2 branches on the docs repository, one which is 1.7x, one which is 8.x. And when you create a new pull request to bring changes into this repository, you choose the right branch and it updates the right version. So it's quite simple for the contributors, but it makes it a little bit more complex for us to build. Because what happens now is that when you look at the new structure of the docs, what we have is we have a content folder where we have the 1.7 content, which comes from one branch, and we also have the 8 folder that contains the 8 version, which is another branch from the same repository. And so we have the themes. So we needed a new workflow to be able to bring these 2 branches in the same location, then build the theme, and we used Hugo just like before. So to do this, we used GitHub submodules. I'm going to show it just before. I'm going to move to the next slide. It will be easier to explain. So this was the previous workflow to build and deploy the documentation version. When someone was contributing to the documentation, it would be a pull request. then it will be reviewed, approved, merged. Whenever there was a new change in the repository, this will trigger a build. It will build the website, build the assets, whatever. And when it's good, it was deployed using GitHub page. So quite a simple workflow. First contribution, then build, then deploy. Now, what we do is that when we have contribution as pull request on the docs repository, when it's merged, this triggers a submodule update on the DevDocs site repository that is going to fetch the latest version of each branch for the two submodules. And maybe in the future, when we have a PrestaShop 9 or a PrestaShop 10, there will be new folders and new submodules. But once again, it will be many branches of the same repository. So we had to put these two different repositories because we had one with multiple branches. Each branch is a source of content, and one where we just gather every submodules, each being one branch, and we can build the full version. So when the DevDocs site is being built, every submodule is at the latest version. So the 1.7 documentation is up to date. The 8 version is up to date. We can build the website using Hugo, just like before, and deploy it just like before using GitHub page. So, so what I wanted really to highlight that we changed the structure of the project for our internal needs, and we just followed basically Symfony example. But what we made sure is that it's almost as easy as before to contribute to the documentation. The main thing you have to think about is that when you are changing the 1.7 documentation, you must provide a pull request against 1.7x branch. And when you provide a contribution to version 8, you provide a pull request against branch 8.x. And if you want your changes to be applied for both versions, well, you will need to perform 2 pull requests. One will be the original, and then you will be a backport. This allows us not only to be able to easily backport commits, which is kind of a good way to keep the two content in sync, but also it's important because contributions to the documentation are contributions to the project. So we need to track them, monitor them, because we know every contribution has to be registered so that we have this little contributors page where we have the scores. But more importantly, it's important to follow the history. So by making sure that we use branches and a single repository for everything, it makes it kind of okay for us to track it, trace it, and know who did what. And that's all for the documentation. So it's live. You can now document either PrestaShop 1.7 or 8 on the docs repository. Don't forget to choose the right branch, and it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu, for the demo. And it's now the time for the demo of Yevgeny about Symfony Form demo module. Yevgeny, let's go for your demo.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm just trying to understand how the whole selection of screen works. Oh. Yeah, just trying to figure out how this. Hello, and yes, so you can see my screen, right? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
That looks good. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is the demo Symfony Form module. So you can find it in the GitHub in PrestaShop example modules, and it's the demo Symfony Form. It's this module here. So anybody can download it. So now the question, the purpose of this module. Well, PrestaShop, of course, for a long time now allows you to use Symfony Form in modules as well as Symfony Form types. But there might be some question how to use certain form types and specifically how to use PrestaShop form types. Well, there is already a form types reference which you can find in the PrestaShop dev docs. Usually just Googling PrestaShop and form types should lead you right to it. And here you see the unique form types that were created specifically for PrestaShop. And well, of course, you can use any other Symfony form type in your modules, but those are already covered by Symfony. So this example module mainly focuses on PrestaShop's form types. Okay, so already have downloaded and installed it in my PrestaShop. And upon installation of the module, of course, you can find it through usual module manager. you will have two additional tabs here under configure. So you have admin Symfony form single and admin Symfony form multiple. I will explain the differences a bit why I have separated them into two tabs, but right now we basically have three blocks. So in admin Symfony form single, we have a form type, which is more meant for all the various text forms. So I separated them based on the types here. So we have text fields for formatted text area and all the others. And of course, we have choice forms, and then we have the third type for additional ones. Okay, so here we see the various text types, and I'm guessing, yeah, you won't see my PHP store now. So, okay, so I'll try to fix it up. Share screen, share, because I have multiple monitors and it allows me to either use all of my monitors or only one. Can I just select PHP Storm for this one? Okay, so I guess I can just show the code from the GitHub. It will work in a similar way. Okay, so I'm sharing the screen back, and yeah. So going into the Symfony form, and here we have in the SRC. So this is the first controller for a single form type. So we have those two controllers here. Of course, the tabs are added during the installation. And this is the default controller here. So this one is very simple. So we only have the index action. So we're checking, we're getting the form handler, we're treating form for form handler, and we are handling the request as well as checking if the request is valid. The important part here is that it checks if it's valid or not, because then it allows you to use constraints. Then you have the usual handling, and you're rendering the form again. So looking at this form, we have basically three additional files for each form. So for the text one, we have text data configuration, text form data provider, and text type. So this is usually the way the PrestaShop handles option forms. So first we have the data provider, which is defined in modules config services.yml. So yeah, the provider is here at the text one, and basically just uses the text configuration in it. And here we have your usual data handler, which uses data provider, which in turn uses configuration. So here most of the services are just to make sure the PrestaShop does its own thing, like handling hooks and things like that. So provider, the only thing that it does is it directs back to configuration. Of course, you can add additional logic here, like validation, but here, because my form is meant to work with configuration database and simply write values into the data in configurations table, and that's why I use the configuration here. And here it's also very simple. We have a very simple validation, and we either set values or we get values. The important thing here is notice that certain fields have HTML true. And that's because in this form, we have a formatted text area type, which allows you to have HTML values. But often enough, the issue, especially for people who use it for the first time, and they'll notice that it just doesn't work. They try to save it, the value is still the same, it doesn't have any bolts, it doesn't have any other color, and that's most often because at some point in the code, you have a HTML parsing, which basically removes all of your HTML, well, escaping, I should say, not parsing, and it removes all of your HTML, and then, of course, the value doesn't save the way you expect it to save. So yeah, making sure that the value is in HTML is important. And right now, going back, I just want to overlook the form type, the final ingredient, so to speak, for this form. So text type. So it's also pretty simple. All it has is a simple build form. And here I just included all of the form types from the text. So we have the formatted text area, which, as you can see, is just the formattable one. So we have generatable, which is just simple generate. We have text with length counter, which just counts the length. So most of those names are pretty self-explanatory. And finally, we have the translatable type, which is perhaps the most interesting because the translatable type allows you to have various subtypes. For example, here we have the default one is a simple text type, More simple input. Then we have a text area, which is slightly larger, and it's also available to have translatable formatted text area. You can see those types here. So the text area is the only difference is that it can be moved around. So the generatable, you can choose the length of the code which it will generate. So this one's here, and translatable works pretty fine. It's also, you need to make sure that actually PrestaShop with configuration, it's quite simple because if you try to save values to the configuration here, even with translatable type, it's enough to pass it. It will pass an array, and PrestaShop already understands how it works, so it will save values to different languages. But if you're saving data somewhere else, you need to make sure that you're parsing translatable area correctly. Right, and also this one has constraints as well, which work just fine in the form as long as you're checking if the form is valid, and as long as you only have one form in the page. What do I mean by that? Well, to demonstrate the difference, I created also the second tab where we have multiple forms in the page. So here I have separated into two. We have choice form types and we have order form types. And now, if we check the controller, you see that it's slightly different. So in SRT, controller and multiple forms. And now we have the index value just the same, but it doesn't check for any sort of processing and just renders the form. Instead, we have two different actions, one for each form. Why is it done this way? Well, because it would be very incorrect code-wise to render to do everything in the same action. You basically increase the probability of sort of bugs because you have one action which handles two different forms. So you might accidentally write something, you overcomplicate your code. In general, it would be a bad practice. So what we have here is just different forms. And notice one thing here: we are no longer checking if the form is valid. This is done because after the form, after the processing is done, we are redirecting back to the original URL. And the way Symfony works is that all of this validation is being saved somewhere, and after redirect, it's gone. So isValid would work in a way that it would not allow your form to be saved, but because you're redirected, you won't see why it was not allowed to be saved. So you're basically, even if you're not allowing user to enter wrong values, you're confusing him with what exactly went wrong. So you can no longer use the validation and you can no longer use constraints. It's not something, it's not the end of the world. You can still validate form, and PrestaShop already has a functionality for it. As you can see, it checks from the form data handler if you have any errors, and it adds flashes for them. So it means that at any point during so demo Symfony form, SRT form, and here we have a data configuration or data provider. So those data configurations and data providers are exactly the same. The data provider goes to the configuration, and in the configuration we have setting and retrieving configuration back and setting the values. And here the prime difference is you see it always returns an empty array. So if you return any sort of string here, it will go back to the controller, and controller will throw it as an error. So that's the way to validate. So you can choose to either validate during the configuration or during the whole data provider. So overviewing the form types themselves, once again, nothing else is really different, only the form types. And here we have a order form type, a choice form type. So the choice form type, we have various form types which are allow you to make different choices, from the simple ones like category choice tree and country choice tree, which already integrate data retrieving for them. So all you need to do is to add this to your form type, and you have a very nice selection of either category or country. Also, you can have your own choices as you want them as well. So we have material choice, which allows you multiple. We have choice tree, which allows only one. We have multiple choice table, which allows you to have as many choices as you want. And also we have a shop choice. Okay, so it's named incorrectly, but basically this displays all of the shops that are available in your PrestaShop, and you can choose one of them there. So from here, perhaps the most interesting thing, and why I think it's important to have demos like this, is if you're first developing and you want to include material choice tree, it might be confusing how exactly do you put it in your page. So now that you have the demo, all you need to do is go here and you see a great example. So how choice tree is being structured, and you can reuse it in your code. And a lot of this works very well with the configuration table, because if you look in database, you already see that I already tried to save those choices. So and they're stored here as JSON. So everything is already done. So all you need to do is to include it in your module. Okay, I've lost the original. Okay, here it is. So we have multiple choice table, but all in all, they work similarly. And finally, for the other types, we have other type. So here are just some miscellaneous types. Some of them are more used in the grid rather than the form, but you can use them all in the form pretty well. So here we have things like money with suffix, we just add suffix, various date pickers, date ranges, and also min-max filters. All of them are also stored as JSON, I believe, so you can use them out of the box with configuration form. And if you want to use this form and handle it differently, so don't put it in configuration, of course you can do that too, but then you need to use your own validation. So yeah, just one final thing is that it already uses the simplified forms. So from here, if we take a look at the templates, which can be found here, so form and multiple forms. So for the form, it's extremely simple. So we have just some general div, name of the setting, and form widget, which renders all of the form. And that's all you need with simplified forms. You no longer need separate blocks for each input. But of course, you need to make sure that you are using PrestaShop's theme. And here I'm just extending layout to make sure see the rest of the PrestaShop. The multiple forms is slightly differently because remember that I use different actions for saving different forms. So the action itself can be added here. So in the form start, you just add action, which will be responsible for parsing this form. And the form saves successfully. Yeah, that's mostly it. For example, form type, feel free to use it. So you can get it in, once again, PrestaShop. Just search in the GitHub PrestaShop example, and you can find all of GitHub. And you can find this PrestaShop example modules, and you can use the demo Symfony form, as well as many other example modules, which will hopefully help you when developing your own modules or PrestaShop. And that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you for the demo, Evgeny. So I think it's time for the question and answers part. Maybe we can invite Daniel, Mathieu, and Thomas on the stage.
Yes, we got one question. It was from PrestaSafe. Yes, what if we have repeater fields? But I'm not sure what is a repeater field.
Yeah, I'm trying to Google it right now. So I imagine it's like a parent. Yeah, I'm also not sure. I guess it's like sort of parent of multiple fields. But if you could expand on repeater fields, maybe we could provide an answer.
So Christian said maybe an input where you click add more, and then it creates new items like in a collection.
Also, it's like a Cookstone collection, and then it saves the whole data, so what field it was and what the value was, I guess something like this. I guess there is no such thing in PrestaShop at the moment because simply we didn't have a need before.
Maybe we'll have some when we finish a new product page, because I believe in the new product page, there are some inputs like this. For example, the adding SEO tags or adding categories, but I don't know if they will be reusable. But yeah, so right now, no, maybe soon. I see Jonathan is thinking the same.
Okay. Do we have any more questions about any demos? I don't think so.
Well, it was already a cool demo. We have 1 hour, so it was a good session, and we're always available on Slack if needed.
Yes. All right. So I think it's time to say goodbye and thanks everyone for watching every demos. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. We are on Slack or even on GitHub if you have any issues. And that's it.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Eric.